Hi, in this video we'll be discussing the major keywords used to declare variables in JavaScript. That is, we'll be talking about variable declaration in JavaScript. But before I continue, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, consider subscribing. I'm Abdurrahman Jamil and I release videos about web development. I'm a great fan of JavaScript, so if you would like to watch my future JavaScript videos or any other video related to web development, consider subscribing to this channel. Now, before I continue, let me quickly create a new project here in this editor that I'm using. And if you don't know what this is SPCK editor, and this editor is only available for, I think it's only available for Android, because I'm coding on my Android device right now. If you are using a PC, you can just follow the normal procedures that you normally would use if you are coding on your PC. You don't have to change it. But for people using Android like I am doing, you can just download this editor from the Google Play Store and use it like that. So let me create a new project here just for the purpose of this video. So let me just say variable declaration like that. So create, and I have index main.js and style.css here. So let me just make some quick changes and let me increase the font size. I think it's kind of too small, so let me increase the font size to 15, and I'll pause this video. I want to make some changes here. So I've made the changes I want to make, and basically what I just did is I added this script here, which is mainly for Eruda.js, so I'll be able to use the console with my mobile browser. There's no console for mobile browsers, so you can check the link I will leave in the description of this video to learn more about Eruda.js like that. So let's go into this main.js, which is where we are going to be carrying out everything we want to do for this video. So before I start writing anything here, I'd like us to go through some quick images, like to read about the keywords used in JavaScript to declare variables. So I'm going into the gallery now. The first keyword is the var keyword, as we might know already. We have the var keyword, the let keyword, and the const keyword. These three keywords are the three keywords that are available for us in JavaScript to declare variables. Now let's take a look at the var keyword first. So the var keyword, what is it used for? What does it offer? Okay, it declares a variable globally or locally to a function. What does that mean? That is, when we declare a variable, basically in JavaScript there's something we call scope, and I think I'll try to explain what scope is now. So let's say, for example, this is our script, this page here, like this. Let me just change this color like so. I'm sorry for this. So let's say this is our script, for example, and here we declared a variable with the var keyword, or let me not even say the var keyword yet. We declare a variable here. We now define a function here like this. This is a function. This one at the top here is a variable. Now this variable that we declared here at the top of the script is in the global scope. Why? Because it's not inside of any function. Like this variable here, I'm going to practice this in the editor, but I'm just trying to explain it with some diagrams. So this variable that we declared here at the top, it's not inside the function. Remember that this box here, this one like this, is the script, and now we have defined a variable here, and we define a function here. So the variable here is not inside any function, so it is in the global scope. So that is what we refer to as the global scope in JavaScript. So if we have a function here like this, and then we now define a variable inside this function here, this function has a local scope. It is declared locally to this particular function here. I don't know if that's understood. So if we declare a variable outside a function, like we just define it in the global scope like this, so it is said that that variable is declared globally. But the variables that we declare inside a function like this, we say the variable is declared locally to the function. So what am I trying to say? Let me go into the editor and see, and write some code there. Oof. So now we're in the editor, and this is our main.js. Now let's use the var keyword. So let's say we have something like var my variable is equal to 34, like this. Now this variable that we have declared here, the name is my variable, and we use the var keyword to declare it. As we have used the var keyword, it makes, and let me not say it, I will say this variable is in the global scope. That is, it can be accessed in any function down the line. So let's say, for example, we define a function here. Let's say we have a function like this, and what this function does is it takes in, let me just say, console.log my variable, like this. So now remember that this variable is not defined. My variable here was defined outside this function. My variable is in the global scope because it is not inside any function. Now we now declare the function a function. That's the name of the function here, and we are now logging this my variable from the global scope. We are logging it into the console from inside this function here. So let me now call the function. So I'll just say a function like this. So I'm calling the function. Let me now go into the browser and see what's happening. So I'm currently in the browser, and here we have this variable declaration here. So let me just click down it and open it in a new tab. So I think this is it, variable declaration. So I can now click on the index.html. Remember that I'm coding on my Android, so you don't have to do the same thing I'm doing here. As you can see, we have 34 here. And why do we have 34? We have 34 here because my var variable that we declared up here is accessible inside this function, because generally global variables can be accessed from inside any function, and that's how variable declaration works. So using the var keyword, we can define variable locally or globally. Now we have practiced globally now using my variable, because this is a global variable. Now let us practice locally. So locally is we are defining a function not in the global scope this time around, but locally here. And now let's go back to here where we have this. It says declares a variable globally or locally to a function, and it doesn't take block scope into consideration during declaration. That is, this var keyword, there aren't just two scopes in JavaScript. So we can have a variable declared globally, like the one we just did, and we can have it declared locally to a function, like the one we are going to do now. But we can also have it declared locally to a block of code, which is not even a function. So what do I mean by that? Let me go back into the editor. So let's first practice locally to a function now. So what I want to do now is I want to define a variable, and I'll declare it locally to this function named a function here. So let me say var. Remember that we are using the var keyword here. Let let me say my variable 2 is equal to 45. So let's now log my variable, which is the variable that we declared in the global scope, plus my variable 2, which is the one that we declared inside this function. So my variable here is a global variable, that is, it has been declared globally. My variable 2 here is a local variable, it has been declared locally to this function. So I hope that's understood. Now let's see what's happening. So my variable plus my variable 2, then we're now calling this, we're logging the answer into the console, remember. So we should have 79 in the console now. We should have 79 in the console. Let's see. So let me reload, and as you see, we have 79. Why do we have 79? We have 79 because when using the var keyword, variables that have been declared variables can be declared globally and they can be declared locally to a function, like this one that we have here. So let me just comment all of this out. Now let me explain something here. So far so good. We have practiced declaring variables globally and locally to a function. It's also possible to declare a variable locally to a block of code, like to a block. It might not, okay, when we say a block is basically anything that can be inside of two curly braces like this. So here we have this opening curly brace, which is for this function here. I'm talking about this one here, and we have this closing curly brace here. So everything that is between these two is a block of code. So a block of code can contain one or more statements. I'm talking about in JavaScript now, because each programming language has its own way of doing things. But in JavaScript, when we have one or more statements within two parentheses, two curly braces like this, it is referred to as a block of code. In this case, this block of code belongs to this function, but it's also possible to define a block of code that does not belong to the function, which is what we want to do here. Now let's say we have a variable in the global scope. Let me say var. We are using the var keyword, remember, my variable 3, and we want to set this one to be 50. And now we now have var my variable 3 again, which is equal to 45. Let's see what happens when I say console.log 50 and 45. So that let's say my variable 3 like that. So let's take a close look at this now. We have my variable 3 here. We declared it to be 50, and here we have my variable 3 again, 45. Now generally you think this my variable 3 is just limited to this block of code. Remember that this is a block of code now, when we have opening and closing curly braces and we have statement like this inside it. But that's wrong, because we are using the var keyword, and there is something about the var keyword. Whenever we declare this variable here like this inside a block of code that does not belong to a function, if the name of the variable is the same thing, it will take this variable as the same thing for this one. So instead of declaring another variable here as my variable 3, this my variable 3 here is the same thing as this one. So the value that we assigned to it here is overwriting this 50 that we assigned to it here. It will not say, because it's a block of code, so it will now remain 50 here. Let's see what's happening first. If let me just preview it in the browser, then we can come back and continue. So let me refresh this. As you can see, we have 45. Now, as I was explaining before, the reason why we have 45 is because my variable 3 here, we assigned it a value. Remember that we are using var, and the name of the variable is still the same thing, my variable 3. But now this value here is overwriting this value here, And the reason for that is because when we use the var keyword, it does not take ordinary block scope like this into consideration if it is not a function. So suppose we have something like this. Currently what we have in the browser is how do I say it, is 45. Yeah, so let me now turn this block of code into a function like so. Let me say my function like this. Now if you look at this variable, this block of code, I have turned it into a function. In it I said my variable 3 should be 45. Now even if let me call the function, say my function like this. So even if I call the function here, my variable 3 here, when I log it into the console, it will be 50 instead of the previous 45 that we had. Why? Because the var keyword, it takes the function block of code into consideration. But if it is not a function, that is, if the block of code does not belong to a function, it will take the variable as the same variable that we declared outside that function, if the name of the variable, if they are the same. So let me go to the browser and see. Before we had 45, now we will have 50, because now I've turned this block of code to be a function. And even because I called the function, it will not change my variable 3 to, it will not reassign the value to 45. Rather, this 45 is going to be declared locally to this function here. But if I remove this function thing like this and I just leave the block of code like that, the value that we assign to my variable 3 here is going to overwrite the one that we have here. So let me go into the browser and see, and let's see what's happening. So let me refresh it now. As you can see, we now have 50, which is because I turned that ordinary block of code to be a function. And even if I call the function, it's not going to reassign the value that we assigned to that my variable 3, simply because we declared it again inside the function. And the reason for that is because the var keyword, it declares a variable globally or locally to a function. Just those two. Anything apart from that, if you declare a variable with the same name, it will just overwrite the previous value if you are not defining it inside a function. So I hope you understand what that means. So let's go back to our image that we were reading before. Oh shit, an image. That's rubbish. So here we have the var keyword declares a variable globally or locally to a function, which is what I've demonstrated. If it is not locally to a function, if it is locally to a block of code, just a block of code that is not a function, it will overwrite the previous value. So it does not take ordinary block scope into consideration when it is declaring the variables. If it is not locally to a function, then it will just override the previous value. And that's it for the var keyword. So let's go to the let keyword. So the let keyword, it allows declaration of variables limited in scope to a block. It defines variables globally, locally to a function, and locally to blocks or statements and expressions. Now, the limitation that we had when we declared the variables with the var keyword the other time was that we could not declare the variables locally to a block of code that is not a function. But if we are using the let keyword, we can surely do that. What do I mean? Let me go into the editor and let's see what's happening. So here, let me comment this out. And now let me declare this variable here. I'll say let my variable equal to 21. Then I can now define a block of code here. Let me say just for example, enter, and let me say let my variable equal to 54. And now at the end, let console.log my my variable. So for this example, assuming we were using the var keyword, when we log my variable to the console, what we are going to get is 54. Because my variable does not consider this ordinary block of code that is not a function. It takes it as we are reassigning the same variable. Bear in mind that the name of the variable is the same here, my variable, my variable. So when the name of the variable is the same like this, and we are using the var keyword, it's going to take it as we are reassigning the previous variable, as long as this one here is not a function. But now we are using the let keyword. The let keyword, it considers block scope like this. And I said before that putting one or more statements in a pair of curly braces like this makes that a block of that's what makes a block of code, I mean. So basically everything from here like this down here like this is, so like this is a block like that. So let's go into the browser and see what we have. So what we should have here is 21, because we are using the let keyword. And the reason why we are going to have 21 is because the let keyword, it allows declaration of variables globally, that's one, locally to a function, or locally to a block, not just functions. It can be a function block, it can be another block. Basically we can have a for loop like this. Say for let I be equal to 0, so I is less than 5, I is less than 5, then we have I plus plus like this. So it lets me make this let. So I is 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. I'm supposed to use lowercase I don't know why I was even entering uppercase I. Now assuming we have, let's say for example, let me say let I be equal to 78. So we are coming back to this example here. Let me just comment it out. I'm coming back to that example for let. So here I was saying what we are going to have here will be 21, because we are using the let keyword for the variable declaration. And why we are going to have 21 is because the let keyword allows declaration of variables globally, locally to a function. Like we have here, remember that this is a function, and the variable that we declared inside this function is declared locally to the function, this function. So the let keyword allows us to declare variables locally to a function. That is, whatever value we assign to that variable inside that function is not going to affect the value that we stored in the variable outside the function. And thirdly, we can also declare variables locally to blocks, like for example this one here. So let's see what we will have in the browser. So F5 now. As you can see, we have 21. Why do we have 21? Simply because we are using the let keyword. So let me go back to the editor. Now we have 21 because my variable here is different from this my variable here. So basically this is a variable and this one is another. So this is another variable. So these two variables, they are different even though their names are the same, because we are using the let keyword. Assuming we are using the var keyword, for example, these variables are going to be taken as the same variable. So the value that we assign to this one is going to overwrite this one. And the reason why it's going to happen like that if we are using the var keyword is because this block of code is not a function. So let's see what happens if we change this one to var. Currently we have 21 in the console, so let's change this to var like this, this also to var. So instead of having 21 now, we are going to have 54 in the console. Let's see if that's true. So let's refresh. As you can see, we have 54 now. and that's because we are using the var keyword. I already explained why that is so. So that's it for the let keyword and the var keyword. So let me just comment this out. Yeah, so back to this example here. What I was trying to say is that when we define a loop like this, when we create a loop like this, for example this for loop here, we have this opening curly brace here, we have this closing curly brace here. Everything inside of these two curly braces, everything inside will be referred to as a block of code. So if we define a variable here with the let keyword, as you can see, we're also defining the variable here let like this. So this let that we define here is local to this block of code here. So whatever I is here will not affect this I that we define here. Remember that it is the same I, but because we are using the let keyword, the I that we have here will not affect the I that we declared before the loop. Okay, let's see what that's going to give us. Let me just console.log I, console.log I, like that. So let me now check it out in the browser, and let's refresh that. As you can see, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember that we started let I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, and I plus plus, which means that I will take, the values of I will range between 0 and 4. So let me just go back into the editor and now log the previous I that we had into the console. So let me now say console.log I again. If you look at it clearly, the value of this I here, it will not affect the value of this I, because the let I that we declared here is local to this for loop, because this for loop is a block of code. This block of code here belongs to the for loop. Even though it's not a function, the let keyword is still going to let us declare variables local to the block. But if we were using the var keyword, once we change the value of I with var, is going to overwrite the one that we have here. So if I say console.log I here, it's going to give us 78. So basically what we are going to have now is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because this is a loop. Then at the end we are going to have 78. So let's see if that's true, and we can just refresh like this. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, then 78. So it's very simple to understand these things here. And back to the editor. Now if I change this let here to var, let's see what happens. We have var like this. So you probably guessed that already. What will happen is that after we have 1, 2, 3, 4 here, when we log I here, it's going to be 4, because we are using the var, and once we change the value of this I inside of this block of code, it's going to overwrite this value that we have here, because the var keyword does not allow declaration of variables locally to a block of code that is not a function. I hope that's understood. So let's see what happens when we run this in the browser, and we can just refresh. Okay, yeah, what we have now is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I forgot, because we have I plus plus. I totally forgot. Now instead of having 74, we are having 5. Why is that? Because we are using the var keyword, and we said I plus plus here, which means that after each loop, increase the value of I by 1. And because the last time it increased the value of I by 1, it now checks if I is less than 5. Remember that time I will be 5, so it's going to stop the loop. And since I is now 5, this I that we have here is also going to be 5, since we are using the var keyword for the declaration. And when we log I into the console, instead of giving us 78, it's going to give us the value of I that has been changed inside this block of code. So this I that we have here, when we are using the var keyword, the I that we have inside of this block of code is the same as this I here, but assuming it's the let keyword, the I here is different from this I here, and that's the basic idea behind the var keyword and the let keyword. And the last one that we have is the const keyword. Let's read about that. So the const keyword, it allows declaration of variables limited in scope to a block, just like let. Also defines variables globally, locally to a function, etc. like let. So the const keyword is just like let, exactly, almost the same thing, just one difference. And the one difference between the two is that variables declared with the const keyword cannot be reassigned. So once we do that, once we reassign values to a variable that has been declared with const, because const simply means constant, and as we know, the meaning of constant is something that remains like that, it doesn't change. So once we declare a variable with the const keyword, we cannot reassign its value, like we cannot change its value again. It has to be like that. So let's go into the editor and test this out like this. So let's say we want to declare, everything here has been commented out, okay? So let's declare a variable globally with the const keyword. Just for example, we have some number is equal to 980, like this. Then inside this function, log number, that's the name of the function, log number. So we want to declare the variable, a variable with the same name here inside this function. So we say const. Remember that the const keyword behaves just like let. So the some number that we declared outside the function is not the same as the some number that we are going to declare inside the function. So let me just say some number is equal to 543. Then we can now say console.log some number. And now we are going to call this function. So instead of calling the function separately, let's just wrap it inside. Let's make it call itself. And how do we do that in JavaScript? We have to do this like this. So what am I doing here? I'm wrapping the whole function inside opening and closing parentheses like this. So this is the opening parenthesis, and after the end of the function here, I put another closing parenthesis. Then we now call the function using another opening and closing parenthesis like this. So this function is going to call itself, so we don't have to say log number separately again to call the function. But we can still call the function using its name, but by doing this, we don't have to call it for it to run by itself. So since we are now calling it, it's going to run by itself. And now after calling the function, we now want to console.log again some number. Let's see what happens. So hopefully this is what will happen. We have declared some number here in the global scope with the const keyword, and we assigned the value of 980 to it. Now inside this function, we declared the some number again, and we assigned the value of 543 to it. By the time we call this function, since we are calling it by it's calling itself, some number here is going to be 543, and some number here is going to be 980. Why? Because the const keyword behaves like the let keyword, and as we know, the let keyword is going to allow us to declare a variable locally to a function or to a block of code. So this variable this constant that we have declared here with the const keyword is different from this one in the global scope. Remember that the scope is where the variable is accessible. So that's what scope is. Now the sum number here is different from the sum number here because this one is in a function and this one is not in that function. So let's see what happens when we run this in the browser. So let me just refresh this. As you can see, we have 543 and we have 980, and the reason why we have that is because we are calling this function here and we are logging some number into the console. Remember that some number here is 543, which is why we have 543 first, and we now logged some number again. And remember that this sum number here is not going to access some number inside this function. It's going to access this one that is in the global scope, and that's 980. Now if we try to reassign this sum number here, let me say some number is equal to 87, we are going to get an error because we are using the const keyword. We are using the const keyword, and the const keyword represents a constant, so it must not change. So let's see what happens when I try to reassign it from 980 like this in the global scope to 87. So F5. As you can see, we have null, which means we are having errors. It's not logging the error here. I don't know why, but I know we are having an error. If there is no error, we won't be having this null here. The reason why we are having null is because we are trying to reassign the value of the variable declared with the const keyword, which is not permitted, like that. And that is why we cannot use the const keyword inside a loop, because when using it inside a loop, it means we want to reassign the value of the variable every time the loop is run. So what do I mean? What I mean is this. Let's say we have a for loop and we want to say, instead of saying let I like this, we are now saying const I is going to give us an error. So const I is equal to 0. I is less than 2 I plus plus. When we run this in the browser, even if we just say console.log I like this, it's going to give us an error because we are using the const keyword. Let me comment this out. So we are using the const keyword for the I instead of let or var. And when we use the const keyword, it means the variable must not ever be reassigned. And remember that when we are running a loop, the variable is going to be reassigned on every loop. That is, the first time I will be 0, then it's going to log I, and the second time it will try to do I plus plus, which means that we want to increase the value of I by 1. And remember that we are using the const, so it's going to give an error because whatever variable that has been declared with the const keyword must not be reassigned. So let's see what happens in the browser if we run this now. So F5. As you can see, we have 0, null. 0 the first time because we said const I is equal to 0, and that's going to run the loop normally. But the second time, when we try to reassign that I by saying I plus plus, it's going to give null because we are declaring the I with a const keyword. So if we change that const to var, or we change it to let, everything is going to work fine like that. So let's see now. So as you can see, we have 0 and 1. We are not having null again, which means we aren't having errors in the code anymore. So I hope that explains the var, let, and const keywords used for declaring variables in JavaScript. I think I forgot to say something, but I can't actually remember. So an overall summary of what I've been saying is that the var keyword allows us to declare variables globally and locally to a function only, The let keyword allows us to declare functions variables globally and locally to functions or other blocks that are not functions, maybe a loop or if-else statements. Remember that if-else statements too, they are like they contain blocks of code. Let me just set an example on that. So the last example here, maybe. So we just want to use if-else statements, because if-else statements too, they contain block of code. So remember that if you have if true like this, since we're having opening curly brace and closing curly brace, anything here is going to be referred to as a block of code. So we can have one or more statements here. So assuming we have declared a variable, let me say first with var, let me say var re is equal to set like this. I'm just using random stuff here. So if I now say var re is equal to set, if I try to log into the console from here, console.log re, and at the end too we have, let me just copy this down, we have console.log re, console.log re. The console.log re here will give us, okay, let me change the value here from set to rest. So the console.log re here will give us rest, while the console.log re here will give us, this one will give us rest, and this one too will give us rest, because we are using the var keyword for the declaration. And remember, the var keyword does not allow, like, it does not make any change when we are declaring variables in a block scope that is not a function, because the if statements like this is not a function. Even though it has a block of code, like we have this opening and closing curly brace, the var re here will not serve as another variable. Rather, it will overwrite this one that we have here, because we are using the var keyword. So let's see what happens in the browser if I run this. F5. As you can see, we have rest, and these two at the back of rest means we are having rest 2 times. So if I change that var to let, it's going to, the case will change. It will not be rest twice again, it will be rest and set. So let me change that. So instead of using the var, let me just say let, and here too let me say let. As simple as that. And the reason why it won't be the same is because the let keyword allows us, remember, the let keyword allows us to declare variables locally to a block of code or to statements or expressions like that. So this re here is going to be different from this re here. The re variable that we have here is a variable. The re here that we define inside the if, the block of code attached to this if statement, is another variable different from this one, because we are using the let keyword. So this one is going to give rest because it will access this re inside of this block, while this one, the re outside the block, will access this one here, because this console.log is not inside the if, it's not inside the if block of code like that. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So let me just run it in the browser and see. We won't have rest again like we had before. F5, and as you can see, we have rest, then we have set. So that's basically it for the var, let, and the const keywords used for declaring variables in JavaScript. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to view more content from me, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can contact me via Twitter if you have any suggestion or you just want to say hello to me at Abdulrahman Jamil. That's my name, Abdulrahman Jamil. Thank you, and see you later.